Good morning everyone. Basa na tayo na ating libro guys. Kapwa ka Pilipino, magbasa na tayo na ating history. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Today is 22 February 2023. Part 5, The Warriors. Topic number 22, The Japanese Occupation. Basa. The 10-year preparatory period known as the Commonwealth regime was rudely interrupted when the Japanese, looking for territories to accommodate not only their excess population but also their manufactured goods, started the war in the Pacific. Japanese naval bombers attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in December 1941. The United States declared war against Japan, and the war in the Pacific was formally on. As a consequence of this war, the Philippines was occupied by the Japanese. For 3 years, the Filipinos suffered the rigors of war. Civil liberties were suppressed by the enemy. The economy was geared to the demands of the Japanese war. Efforts education was revamped to reorient Filipino thinking along Japanese lines, and political life was limited to the Japanese-sponsored republic. Meanwhile, thousands upon thousands were executed and imprisoned, but the spirit of revolt continued to plague Japanese authorities to the end of the occupation. Background of Pearl Harbor. One of the factors that led the Americans to acquire the Philippines was the belief that the colony would be of strategic importance to the United States. It was then thought that with the Philippines under the United States, no foreign power would dare antagonize her. President Theodore Roosevelt expressed this view in January 1906. When in a letter to Major General Leonard Wood, he declared that Japan had no immediate intention of moving against the United States. Yet because of the rising power of Japan, he expressed his apprehension a year later to Elihu wrote, "I am more concerned," he said, "over the Japanese situation than almost any other." On July 6 of the same year, he again wrote General Wood in command in the Philippines, directing him how to hold the Philippines in case of a Japanese attack. In view of what Roosevelt considered a Japanese menace, he wrote William H. Taft, Secretary of War, that he considered giving the Philippines immediate independence to avoid a Japanese attack. This idea was based on the supposition that the Philippines was, from the military point of view, a liability rather than an asset to the United States. Roosevelt's fear was not without justification. Japan was a fast-rising power in the Pacific, and the Philippine defenses were rather inadequate to thwart any hostile attempt to invade the country. The American military's apprehensions were quieted with President Manuel L. Quezon soon after the inauguration of the Commonwealth prevailed upon General MacArthur to become Field Marshal of the Philippine Army. MacArthur's concept of defense was to build up a Filipino army sufficiently strong to repel a foreign invasion. Consequently, the Commonwealth Assembly's first move was to pass Commonwealth Act No. 1, the National Defense Act, which provided for a citizens' army, with this army bolstered by bomber squadrons based in the Philippines. It was thought that it would be foolhardy for any foreign power to invade the Philippines. Meanwhile, Japan was expanding in surrounding areas. Manchuria was occupied in 1932. 5 years later, China proper was invaded. In 1940, Japan occupied the northern part of Prince Indochina, and the following year the whole Prince colony was occupied. The Japanese menace was now too obvious to be ignored. With Japanese troops concentrating in Southeast Asia, Filipino and American leaders feared that the Philippines might become the next target of the Japanese expansion program. On July 26, 1941, the Philippine reserves and regular forces were incorporated. into the United States Army under the command of General MacArthur. The combined forces were called the United States Army Forces in the Far East, USAFFE. At the same time, the United States, Great Britain, and Holland imposed economic sanctions on Japan. The United States in particular froze Japanese assets in the United States, thereby preventing Japan from using these assets to her advantage. Nevertheless, the United States exerted all efforts to come to a peaceful understanding with Japan. In September 1941, Japan, apparently to discuss American-Japanese problems in a peaceful manner, sent Admiral K. Nomura to Washington. It was believed that Nomura would propose peace to the American officials in order to avert war. It was while Nomura was presenting his government's peace proposals to Secretary of State Cordell Hull that the Japanese bombers surprised Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and sunk the cream of the American Navy. The bombing occurred in the early morning of December 7, 1941, Hawaiian time. Roosevelt and the war. The treacherous bombing of Pearl Harbor drove the American people to present anchor. Secretary Hull gave vent to his ire when he said, "In all my 50 years in public life, I have never seen a document the Japanese peace proposals more crowded with infamous falsehoods and distortions on a scale so huge. The American naval and military losses of Pearl Harbor amounted to 2,897 men. The tragedy struck deep into the hearts of the Americans. The people gathered at the White House in Washington, waiting for President Roosevelt's message to Congress. It was Monday, December 8, 1941, Washington time, at 12:25 p.m. Both houses of Congress met in joint session. 5 minutes later, President Roosevelt, his face grim and deeply lined with worries, delivered his message. "Yesterday," he said solemnly, "December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." Toward the end of the message, he asked Congress to declare war. At 1 o'clock, the United States Senate declared war without a dissenting vote. 10 minutes later, the House of Representatives declared war with only one dissenting vote. The following night, Roosevelt spoke to the Americans and to the free world, saying, "The sudden criminal attacks perpetrated by the Japanese in the Pacific provide the climax of a decade of international immorality. Powerful and resourceful gangsters have banded together to make war on the whole human race. We are now in the midst of war, not for conquest, not for vengeance, but for a world in which this nation and all that this nation represents will be safe for our children." Across the Atlantic on December 8, Prime Minister Winston S. Churchill of England faced the House of Commons and announced to the world that Great Britain would declare war on Japan. With the full approval of the nation and of the empire, he said, "I pledge the word of Great Britain about a month ago that should the United States be involved in a war with Japan, a British declaration of war would follow within the hour." The cabinet, which met at 12:30 today, therefore authorized an immediate declaration of war against Japan. The European War, which commenced in 1939, now expanded to become the Second World War. Bukas na yata to. Ay, okay na. The Japanese offensive. The general offensive plan of the Japanese was to strike immediately at the rich Dutch. Tinitingnan ko kasi yung pages. Ulitin ko lang ha. The Japanese offensive. The general offensive plan of the Japanese was to strike immediately at the rich Dutch and British positions in Southeast Asia, especially Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. To do this, the Japanese naval and air forces had to destroy the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in order to neutralize it, and then to attack the Philippines in order to cut America's lines America's lines of communication in the Pacific. The subjugation of the Philippines was a part of the general plan of conquering the rich countries of Southeast Asia so that their natural resources could be used to bolster up Japan's war machine. While Pearl Harbor was being attacked, Japanese bombers and naval guns were shelling Wake Island. The less than 400 American Marines fought back heroically, but were smothered by the numerical superiority of the attacking enemy. Simultaneously, the enemy struck at Guam and Midway Island, which fell on the same day. In Southeast Asia, the Japanese advanced against Malaya on their way to capture Singapore. In the Philippines, 4 hours after the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombed several places in the Philippines simultaneously. Clark Field was bombed in the morning of December 8, 1941, and American planes on the ground were destroyed. Air attacks were conducted against Davao, Baguio, and Apari on the same day. Nichols Field and Sangley Point suffered the same fate as Clark Field. Manila proper was not attacked in the first days of the war, but during the last days of December, Japanese planes gleaming in the sunlight attacked port area and the ships at the piers. To spare the city, General MacArthur on December 26, 1941 declared Manila an open city. Guns were withdrawn from the city in order to comply with the requirements of international law regarding open city. MacArthur's headquarters at No. 1 Victoria Street in Intramuros was evacuated, but the Japanese did not respect Manila as an open city. Sending bombers in broad daylight over the city, the Japanese bombed Manila. Santo Domingo Church was destroyed. So were the old Intendencia building, now the Central Bank, San Juan de Letran, Santa Catalina College, and the offices of the Philippines Herald, Mabuhay, Debate, and Mandimil. Faced with the grimness and brutality of war, the Filipinos, confronted for the first time by a total war, answered magnificently to the call of duty. They remained calm in the face of danger. To assure them of American help, President Roosevelt on December 28, 1941 spoke to them saying, "I give to the people of the Philippines my solemn pledge that their freedom will be redeemed and their independence established and protected. The entire resources in men and material of the United States stand behind that pledge." Bye everyone. God bless. Bukas na itong The Occupation of Manila. God bless.